In this video, we are going to be going over the applications of factoring polynomials notes. Now guys, up until this point, we've looked at three different ways to factor a polynomial. So we've looked at factoring using factor sum charts. We've looked at grouping and we've looked at bottoms up. Now, today is not going to be any different than what we've been doing in the past. The only difference here now, guys, is that your expressions are in a word problem. The problem may ask you to do a couple extra steps in regards to finding perimeter in this instance, but the process of factoring the polynomials is not going to be any different than what we've been looking at. So let's go ahead and take a look at number one. So number one says the area of Mr. Crockett's rectangular pantry floor can be expressed as x squared plus 11x plus 24 units squared. List a possible expression for the length and width of his pantry floor. What expression can be used to represent the perimeter of the pantry floor? So for starters, here is my expression. We have x squared plus 11x plus 24. Now, I want to find the factors of that polynomial. So when you are trying to determine the best method to use when you are factoring, you always want to look at the polynomial itself. Here, my leading coefficient is 1. And because my leading coefficient is 1, the best method to use here is the factor sum chart method. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my factor sum chart. I am looking for factors of C, which in this case is 24, that give me a sum of B, which in this case is 11. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a graphing window on my calculator, and I'm going to go ahead and type in 24 divided by x, press enter, and then Control T. Here, I see that my factors are 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, and 4 times 6. So now I want to find the two factors that give me a sum of 11, which would be 3 and 8. So now I want to go ahead and set up two sets of parentheses. X goes at the beginning of both, and I'm substituting in those two factors. So my two factors here are x plus 3 times x plus 8. Now guys, if your head is stuck in the bottoms up method, your next step would be to divide. But I also want you to realize that here your leading coefficient is 1. And anytime you divide something by 1, it's going to stay the same. So again, these are my two factors. Now, the question says, list a possible expression for the length and width of this pantry floor. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and say one of these factors represents the length. So I'm going to go ahead and say x plus 3 represents the length. And then I'm going to go ahead and say that the width can be represented by x plus 8. So here is this pantry floor, guys. It's a rectangular pantry floor. Again, we're going to go ahead and say that the length can be represented by x plus 3. And remember, on a rectangle, you have two sides that represent your length. And then it tells us that the width can be represented by x plus 8. And again, you have two sides that represent your width. Now, the next question asks, what expression can be used to represent the perimeter of the pantry floor? Well, guys, if I'm finding perimeter, that means that I want to go ahead and combine like terms going around my rectangle. So here, I'm going to go ahead and say 1x plus 1x plus 1x plus 1x. That is going to give me 4x. And then I want to combine my constants. We have 3 plus 8 plus 3 plus 8, which is going to end up giving me 22. So here my perimeter ends up being 4x plus 22. Now guys, I also want you to remember that the area of a rectangle, right? We know that the formula for area of a rectangle is length times width. So again, it makes sense that we ended up finding two factors. One factor representing my length and the other representing my width. So that's going to be your answer for number one. Let's go ahead and take a look at number two. So number 2 says Dylan is creating a painting for an art show. The polynomial 6x squared minus 19x minus 7 represents the area of the rectangular canvas that Dylan will be painting in square feet. What expression can be used to represent the length and width of the canvas? So here is my polynomial, 6x squared minus 19x minus 7. So again, it is saying that the area of this rectangular canvas can be represented by this polynomial. And again, we know that the area of a rectangle can be represented by length times width. Again, area equals length times width. So here, guys, in order to find the length and width of this rectangle, I want to go ahead and find the two factors that make up this polynomial, or make up this expression here. So here, the best method to use is going to be the either grouping or bottoms up method. I've learned that most of you prefer the bottoms up method, so that's what we're going to go ahead and look at. Now here, my leading coefficient is 6. Now that is why the best method to use here is either grouping or bottoms up, because you have a leading coefficient that is not equal to 1. So the first step in the bottoms up method is to slide and multiply. And I am going to multiply 6 times 7, and I am not focused on the signs. So when I type in 6 times 7 into my calculator, I end up getting 42. So I want to now find factors of 42. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a graphing window in my calculator. And we're going to go ahead and say 42 divided by x, press enter, and then Control T. Here, my first factor pair is 1 times 42. Then we have 2 times 21. We have 3 times 14. And if I keep going into my calculator, or pressing down on my calculator, my last factor pair is going to be 6 times 7. So now I want to pay attention to the sign in front of C. Since this is negative, this means I'm looking for the two factors that subtract to give me 19, which would be 2 and 21. Your next step is to determine the signs of your factors. So remember, if you are subtracting, this means that your signs are supposed to be different. One is positive, one is negative. You are trying to make your two factors give you a negative 19x. So remember, when your signs are different, whatever the factor is of your middle term, whatever the sign is of your middle term, will go to the larger exponent, or the larger factor. So here, 21 would get the negative, and your opposite factor gets the opposite sign. So 2 gets the positive. So from here, we're going to go and set up two sets of parentheses. X goes at the beginning of both, and we are substituting in those two factors. Now, you're not done, because remember, in the bottoms up method, your next step is to divide by your leading coefficient. So I'm going to divide by 6. And now our next step is to reduce the fraction. So if I put 2 over 6 into my calculator to reduce the fraction, I end up getting 1/3. So here I end up with x plus 1 over 3. Then I have x minus 21 over 6. 21 over 6 is going to reduce to 7 over 2. So here this is x minus 7 over 2. So after reducing our fractions, we are still left with fractions. So remember, that means my next step is to do bottoms up. And I'm going to take the bottom of my fraction, bring it up to the front of my binomial. So I end up with 3x plus 1. Looking at my second factor, again, bottoms up, we end up with 2x minus 7. So here, the length can be represented as 3x plus 1, and the width can be represented as 2x minus 7. Now, guys, these are technically interchangeable. If we had ended up putting 2x minus 7 for the length and 3x plus 1 for the width, your answer would have still been correct. Moving on to my next problem. In my next problem, it says, Alexa has a vintage record player in the shape of a rectangular prism. The volume is 10x squared minus 65x minus 35. We want to go ahead and write expressions that represent possible dimensions for the length, width, and height of the record player. Now, guys, here it does tell us, hint, volume equals length times width times height. So, guys, I need to find a factor that represents length, another factor that represents width, and another factor that represents height. Now, the only time we have seen that there should be really 3 factors technically within a polynomial is if our expression contains a GCF. So let's go ahead and check to see if that may be the case in this problem. So remember, to check for a GCF, whenever you have a trinomial, you are going to press menu 2 2 times. Now, in the innermost set of parentheses, we are going to type in our first two coefficients, which are 10 and negative 65. I'm going to close the parentheses and then put comma negative 35. Now, we see that we actually do have a GCF of 5. So here I'm actually going to go ahead and divide all 3 terms by 5. So I am factoring out 5. So I have 10x squared divided by 5. That ends up giving me 2x squared. Then I have negative 65x divided by 5. Negative 65 divided by 5 gives me negative 13x. And then negative 35 divided by 5 ends up giving me 7. Negative 7. So, because I have this GCF, I'm going to go ahead and box that in, and I'm going to save it for later. And I am only focused on what is inside of the parentheses now. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and look at my leading coefficient. Because I have a leading coefficient that is not equal to 1, the best method to use here is either going to be bottoms up or grouping. Again, most people prefer the bottoms up method, so that's what I'm going to go ahead and do here. So using the bottoms up method, I'm going to go ahead and slide and multiply. 2 times 7 gives me 14. So now I want to list out factors of 14. There are only 2 factors for 14. We have 1 times 14 and we have 2 times 7. So now that we have these factors listed out, we're going to go ahead and look at the sign in front of C. Since it's negative, this means we are looking for the 2 factors that subtract to give me 13, which are going to be 1 and 14. Now, remember, because you subtracted, this means that your signs are going to be different. 1 is positive, 1 is negative. So we look at our middle term. It's negative 13x. So remember, when your signs are different, your middle term, the sign for your middle term goes to the larger factor. So here, 14 is negative, and the opposite factor gets the opposite sign. So the 1 is positive. Now guys, just do some mental math. Positive 1, negative 14. When I combine that, I end up with negative 13. You always want to do some mental math to double check that your factors combine to give you your middle term. So now I'm going to go ahead and set up 2 sets of parentheses. X goes at the beginning of both, and I am substituting in those 2 factors. Now, our next step in the bottoms up method is to divide by our leading coefficient. Again, 5 is not my leading coefficient. 5 is my GCF. 2 is the leading coefficient for the trinomial that is inside of the parentheses. So I'm going to go ahead and divide both factors by 2. And now I want to reduce. So reducing my fraction, I see that 1 over 2 does not reduce. So here I can actually go ahead and do bottoms up. And here my first factor is 2x plus 1. Looking at my second factor, we have x minus 14 divided by 2. Well, 14 divided by 2 ends up giving me 7. So here, my second factor is x minus 7. But guys, we also forgot to drop down my GCF of 5. So guys, here, this is actually going to be my final answer. What I want you to realize is that 5 is its own factor. 2x plus 1 is its own factor, and x minus 7 is its own factor. 5 could represent length, 2x plus 1 could represent width, and x minus 7 could represent height. Last problem, let's go and take a look at number 4. The pool at Calallen High School is rectangular shaped and covers an area that can be represented by 169x squared minus 64 units squared. Write expressions to represent the dimensions of the pool. So guys, here when I look at this expression, this is a special case because remember, I am missing my middle term. I am missing bx. So remember, this is a difference of squares problem. This is in the form a squared minus b squared. And to factor this, I would take the square root of a and the square root of b, and I would put this in factored form, which would be a plus b times a minus b. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I want to look at my polynomial. And again, I want to find the value of a and I want to find the value of b. So looking at my first term, I want to take the square root of 169. So to put the square root in my calculator, I'm going to put control x squared. And the square root of 169 ends up giving me 13. Then taking the square root of x squared gives me x. Now I want to find the square root of the second term. The square root of 64 ends up giving me 8. So now, putting this in factored form, I'm going to go and set up 2 sets of parentheses. And I'm going to go ahead and put this in the form of a plus b times a minus b. So a is 13x plus b, which is 8, times, again, a, which is 13x, minus b, which again is 8. So here are the dimensions of the pool at Calallen High School. 13x plus 8 times 13x minus 8. Okay, so now that notes are over, we are going to go ahead and look over your assignment. So just kind of briefly talking about your assignment. On number 1, your leading coefficient is not equal to 1. So that being said here, your best method to use is going to be the bottoms up method. One factor will be your length, the other will be your width. Looking at number 2, again, your leading coefficient is not equal to 1. So you again are going to want to go ahead and perform the bottoms up method here as well. It has already given you one of your factors. It already tells you one of your factors is x plus 4. So we want to go ahead and determine the length. Well, once you factor this trinomial, again, one of your factors should be x plus 4, which represents the width. The other factor that you get for your answer, this is going to represent your length, and that is going to be your answer for number 2. Number 3, we're going to go ahead and come back to because I actually want to go ahead and do that one with you. Number 4, if you look at your leading coefficient, again, it is greater than 1. So here, the best method to use is probably going to be the bottoms up method as well. Number 5 here, technically your leading coefficient is 1. So here the best method to use may end up being the the factor sum chart method. It tells you that the length is already x plus 6. So 1, you are trying to determine the width. Now the second part of this question is asking you to find the perimeter. So again, this is a rectangular garden, and it already tells you that the length of the garden is x plus 6. We are trying to then determine the width. So if I'm trying to find perimeter, remember that means I want to add all sides. I want to combine like terms, but you have to find your width before you can do that. I would reference number 1 on your notes if you need a little bit more help finding perimeter. Number 6 is a difference of squares problem. So look at the last problem on your notes to help you with that problem as well. Number 7 through 15 are some great practice problems going over all of the different methods that we have looked at so far. These questions will be bonus questions, but I highly suggest that you do them. So I'm concerned with you completing numbers 1 through 6 today. If you want, 7 through 15 are bonus. But again, we are going to do number 3 together. So number 3 says Lila is considering 2 different rectangular rugs for her living room. The area of each rug is below, and she needs the width of the rug to be 20x plus 9 feet. So this is important information. We need the width to be 20x plus 9 feet. So one of the dimensions of the rug has to be 26.9 feet. That is the rug we want to go ahead and purchase. So let's go ahead and we have to find the dimensions of both rug A and rug B. So let's go ahead and look at rug A. So for rug A, I'm going to go ahead and start off by sliding and multiplying. Here my leading coefficient is 2, so the best method to use is going to be the bottoms up method. So 2 times 9, that gives me 18. So finding factors of 18, we have 1 times 18, 2 times 9, and 3 times 6. So now I want to pay attention to the sign in front of C. Since this is negative, this means I'm looking for the 2 factors that subtract to give me 7, which are going to be 2 and 9. So because I subtracted, remember that this means your signs are different. One is positive, one is negative. So I need to look at the middle term to determine which factor is which. Now remember, your sign on your middle term always goes to the larger factor. So here 9 is negative, the opposite factor gets the opposite sign, so 2 is positive. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and set up 2 sets of parentheses. X will go at the beginning of both. And I am substituting in those 2 factors. My next step is to divide by the leading coefficient. So I'm going to divide both factors by 2. And our next step is to reduce our fractions. So I end up with x plus 2 divided by 2 ends up simplifying to 1. Then looking at my next factor, we end up with 9 over 2, and 9 over 2 does not simplify. So here, that means I want to go ahead and do bottoms up, and I end up getting the factor of 2x minus 9. So neither of these factors ends up giving me the width of 2x plus 9. So rug A is not my answer. Most likely our answer is rug B, but we have to check our answer. So let's go ahead and work out rug B. So rug B, first step is to multiply 2 times 18. 2 times 18 is going to give me 36. So now I want to go ahead and list out factors of 36. So I'm going to take 36 and divide that by x. And then I will press Control T. So I have 1 times 36. We have 2 times 18. We have 3 times 12. We have 4 times 9. And the last factor will be 6 times 6. So now I want to go ahead and pay attention to the sign in front of C. Since this is negative, I'm looking for the two factors that subtract to give me 5, which are going to be 4 and 9. Now, remember, because you subtracted, this means your signs are different. One is positive, one is negative. We look at your middle term. Whatever the sign of your middle term is goes to the larger factor. So here, 9 is positive, 4 is negative. So now I'm going to go ahead and set up two sets of parentheses. X goes at the beginning of both, and I am substituting in those two factors. Your next step is to divide by your leading coefficient, which in this case is 2, and reduce your fractions. So my first factor, we have x minus 4 over 2, and 4 over 2 actually reduces to 2. Looking at my second factor, we have x plus 9 over 2. Now, we just talked about how 9 over 2 does not reduce. So here, we're going to go ahead and do bottoms up, and this second factor is 2x plus 9. So if you paid attention there, the width, I get a factor of 2x plus 9 for rug B. So here, my answer is going to, again, be rug B. So again, for your assignment, you are completing 1 through 6. 7 through 15 are going to be bonus questions. If you are completely caught up with your assignments, I highly suggest that you attempt them because you do have a test on Tuesday. So we will be reviewing on Monday. So I will see y'all on Monday and enjoy your weekend.